So I'm just standing over to where I would normally do my video, which is over that way. But I heard a rummaging around in the bush behind me, like probably about that far behind me. And I just slowly stood up and turned around, and whether it's a lizard or a snake, I'm not sure. It was just I just saw a tail go into the bush. It's kind of interesting because I came out here last week to do a video that I never ended posting, and I was walking up the path. There was a collection of sticks on the ground, and as I was approaching, one of the sticks quickly slithered into the long grass of the bush. I'm not sure what kind of snake it was. I don't think it was a python. I don't think it would be the nice huggy kind. I think it would be the nice bitey dying kind, because we are in the Australian bush after all. I'm currently girt by flora and fauna everywhere. Wherever I look, I'm girted. And it does remind me of a story which is kind of a strange segue in. Before I met my ex-wife, I was living by myself. I was living in a townhouse, and there was a single mother that was attached to my townhouse. And she knocked on my door one day, and she goes, "Oh, I think there's a snake near my front door." And I don't know, it's like somehow I was the snake expert. I'm not sure she was expecting me to catch it, but me being me, I went and had a look, and there was like this it was kind of like a shoe box or some sort of wooden box underneath, like this layer of it was like a brown paper bag almost. It was just brown paper. I could sort of see a scaled tail sticking out, looking very snake-like. Being fully aware that I'm not Steve Irwin or any type of reptile catcher, just let her know to call a reptile catcher, a proper reptile catcher with the experience and the qualifications, the bravery. Also, like, I went back into my townhouse, and like there was like a curiosity once again, me and my curiosity, and I went back. I got I think it was an umbrella, like it was a long stem umbrella, and I just lifted up the brown paper bag to see if it was indeed a snake, because I only saw probably about a section of it. It turned out to be a blue-tongued lizard that I don't think that poisonous, or not as poisonous as a snake, quite harmless in regards to picking up. So I ended up just picking up the blue-tongued lizard and taking it for a walk. Unfortunately, the neighbour forgot what snake catcher she called, and was desperately trying to cancel the person coming out to catch a lizard. So it's hard to tell in Australia, because sometimes you do see the tail, and it could be a happy lizard or a bitey snake, and it's kind of like the mistake that you don't want to make. The reason why that's a strange segue in is I was going to be talking about double binds, no-win situations, damned if you do, damned if you don't, which does tie into that strangely. But like a double bind, like I fully realize what a double bind can mean. Like, it's kind of like you feel ensnared in a situation. You're kind of ensnared. I wouldn't say entrapped, because entrapped would sort of imply some form of premeditative thought process on behalf of the abuser, but I don't think in real life it actually works out that way. But it can be an ensnarement, which would mean that you're bound, you're trapped, but you're more like a fly in a spider web type of situation. And a double bind, in at least Zen Buddhism, is kind of a good thing to be in, because kind of what a Zen Buddhist monk would actually give you, it's kind of like a riddle sort of thing, or a problem to solve, or how to be spontaneous on command. Or it's like the more you try to plan to be spontaneous, the less you are spontaneous. And it's kind of like these little double binds that they get you in. Or I'm not sure if it's an actual koan, as they would call it, or koan, like a tree falling in the forest and no one's around to hear it. Would it make a sound? That is kind of like a riddle that they would supposedly give you, whether it's a koan or not, to actually put you in a bind. When you realize the answer to the question, there's kind of like an epiphany. When a tree falling in the forest, it's kind of a relational answer. It takes the two, the tree falling, the sound waves of that carrying through the air. I could be down the trail a bit and then hear a tree falling, because it's hitting on my eardrums. So it takes two, the tree falling and the relation of the sound waves for me to actually comprehend and interpret, a tree fell over in the forest. But if no one's around to hear it, then there's no one to actually know of the tree falling. it's kind of an epiphany. But then again, you could take it even further, that when the tree does fall, regardless of anyone's around to hear it, it's not the end of its life. The tree behind me is currently decomposing, providing nutrients for new life to grow. So where is the beginning point and where is the end point? There's also the point where it's like, if, say for example, an old Zen Buddhist monk did think of that little koan a long time ago. It's like the tree is now living on in the memory of the koan. It's like creating mental struggles for others, even though its past experiences have now moved on. An ensnarement, an imbibement, a double bind, where there is a no-win situation, where no matter what you do to try and please or appease a person, you are always seen as a point of jealousy, a point of insecurity, and a point of, once again, the fly trying to leave the web, that source of food, that source of supply, trying to escape. So it's better to reel you back in. So sometimes where logic tries to win out, irrationality seems to be the order of the day. And the more that you try and reason with someone that's been unreasonable, the more that you feel like the crazy person, or are labeled as the crazy person in some regards, because if craziness has friends, then it's also like majority by numbers. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. It's kind of the loudest voice wins in a way. Where it comes to how I was tying it in with the lady with the snake next door, was that sometimes when you're healing from trauma, healing from past experiences, there's many belief systems that are being instilled in you as a way to keep you ensnared, to keep you from leaving that question, make you question your own. It can be quite crazy making behavior. You feel quite crazy because it's like your sense of reality is getting turned upside down, and it comes to a point where no matter what you do to help a person or try to be your own sort of person, the taller that you grow, the more that they undercut, and the more that you try to be yourself, the more that is seen as a threat of you leaving them, or you becoming well, or you just outshining them in some ways. It's kind of like a weird competition mindset that they have. It can lead to statements like, without me in your life, you wouldn't be able to survive. And it's kind of like the demotivator's koan, or the demotivator's way to undermine you in a way. Because when you do bring logic to it, whether you're tethered to them umbilical cord wise, that it's not a symbiotic relationship or a family dynamic where as soon as you step out the door and they're out of line of sight, that you perish, you pass away. And similar to the lady next door, I kind of indicated that I was living by myself, even outside of my family dynamic, and even before I met my partner. And even though I was living by myself, I still had the daily check-ins to see how I was going, see how I was surviving, which is not so much for my benefit, but it was more for my mother's benefit. And even before the relationship began, it was like the ex-wife came to live with me, it wasn't the other way around. So where there's statements of, you know, you wouldn't be able to survive without me, is sometimes statements of, if you start to get better, if you start to have your own sense of confidence, if you have your own well-being, if you have your own identity, if you have your own set of knowledge and skills, then that means that I will be less and you will be more in this competition mindset, and that you might leave me. And if someone's fearing you leaving them is an insecurity, whereas it should be, you know, a good thing. It's like someone's got a skill set, you've got a skill set, you work well together. So there can be that sort of a dynamic. There can be things where it's like, no matter how you try to help someone, it's a pushing away and blaming of the other people that they aren't doing enough, when there's little or no effort involved in them taking self-agency of their own lives, of what they want to do. And it becomes a liability not only for them, but for other people, because if you're trying to do the best that you can to help a person, they kind of don't want to help themselves because they're invested in that sick role. Then it becomes where no matter what you're trying to do, that it's not going to do it. And if they're not, so that becomes a liability for yourself. And if they're not enacting that upon themselves, then it becomes a liability for them, because if it's self-care that you're trying to promote for them, the health condition it'll get worse. So it's a tricky thing, because no matter what you do, no matter what you try and say, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Following instructions that you're given, and when you follow the instructions that they don't work out, you shoulder the blame of that responsibility. You're the one to blame for that. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It's a no-win situation. And when I talk about these situations, it's situations where the person sees that sense of failure, that sense of shame, that sense of blame, not right for them to take upon themselves, and it's perpetuated onto someone else. So therefore, you have to shoulder the blame. You have those broad shoulders that you have to shoulder the weight of the world, which is more shouldering the blame that you have to carry for other people's logic. And the more that you try and logic or reason with unreasonable people, kind of reminds me of that episode with The Simpsons. I think it was a Halloween episode where Chief Wiggum leaves Ralph in the car and he goes, I'm just going to go try and talk some sense into this crazy homeless man. And the guy's just ranting away there. Chief Wiggum's trying to talk some sense into him. In a way, it is a funny way to link it back to the tree falling in the forest, because it's a relationship. It takes two to actually enter into that dynamic. The person trying to reason logic into someone who is not accepting of that logic or accepting of the right or wrong of things. It's more your right to be wrong in something. A blame cycle that you enter into because you're partaking in it. It's like kind of like people who feel entitled are allowed to feel entitled because the simple point of them being allowed. A person has that entitlement to disrespect you, and similar to a relationship, it only happens if you're allowed it to happen. But similar to an environment, what you grew up in becomes your normal. It's like when I went to China, some of our we had translators and guides basically in one. And I found a lot of the Chinese translators actually had American English accents. But one of us asked them about it, and they were saying that when they were learning English, that they would be learning through like courses that were with American instructors. So they were adopting the American accent. So when they speak English, they'll be speaking it with an American accent. Good example is me. I'm born in New Zealand. I've got an Australian accent. I've assimilated it to my environment, which is a really roundabout way of me saying our environment of what we learn, what we think is normal, our situation in the world, our belief systems, is also how we're going to interact with the world, sort of thing. And some of our interactions might be with some demeaning people that see you as that point of jealousy, that if you seen as something of worth, even in front of friends, there can be casting all these malicious things about you because you are being seen. And if you're being seen, and the attention is being taken off the other person, of them being this great person, which they may have just assimilated some of like what you've learnt into their own lives, which only becomes on a surface level basis. Because that depth of experience, that depth of applied knowledge comes with time, comes with effort, comes with failures, and being happy with those failures and learning from those and growing from those. What we learn from our environment, we tend to gravitate to. So sometimes it's taking the intensity out of some of the emotional charge, so we can start to see ourselves from a different perspective and start to learn new behaviors, and that we are of value. And sometimes that what we were told was merely projections of what this person wanted us to be, to keep us ensnared once again, that fly not allowed to leave the web, because that source of supply, that source of knowledge, that source of value, that source of therapy, that source of cathartic release would fly away. And if it flies away, then it leaves that very insecure person now has to tend to their own needs and has to tend to their own set of values or whatever that may be, or merely just wait for the next fly to get ensnared in that. Where you're told that you need more friends and all these sorts of things, your sense of value is devalued in front of other people. It can be hard to even try and connect with other people because you've always been neither being heard or allowed to be heard. If you have something that is said, it's kind of like belittled and you feel small in that. It can be hard to grow that confidence when it's similar to if a tree was trying to grow and I just kept on chopping it down, it's going to be hard for it to grow tall because it's always going to have someone getting in its way. Similar to the Chinese translators, it's like their world might have opened up a bit more by learning a different language, a different way of speaking, and sometimes finding a different way of speaking to our own selves, where it's not of these devaluing, demotivating words, can start to motivate ourselves. And it's also knowing that the more that we partake in poison, the more that we get sick. So the more that we linger on these memories, on these cycles in a way, the more that we get caught in it. And it's very easy to say, like, I'll just move on, sort of thing. But as an awareness, a cycle perpetuates itself because it's a cycle. And when we become aware of the cycle, then we can start to step off that cycle. So knowing sometimes, the more that we try and find reason in unreasonable people or unreasonable actions, the more that we try to find logic in illogical actions or people, it's once again, it's entering into something that will never find its outcome, because the nature of it is irrational, it's illogic. You could say, oh yes, it's all their childhood trauma stuff and that, but does it make it right? And do you feel right in going, well, that's completely acceptable? They had perfect motives to make me feel this way. Which means, rather than a cycle, it starts to become a direct path elsewhere. So sometimes it is learning of things, but it's also starting to apply it, or it's an experiential feeling of your emotions, to feel into them, to let them go, and to learn new sets of behaviors where it becomes second nature, sort of thing, rather than having that demotivating coach in your brain, having that motivating coach that accepts your failures for what they are as learning experiences and values yourself for even giving a damn about yourself and wanting to try. And rather than cutting yourself short or cutting yourself down every time that, you know, you're not as much as you should be or what other people are, it's just what we have in this moment, and those people probably had less at one stage as well. And less becomes more. From that little seed becomes the big tree, and nurturing yourself in that. I haven't seen a snake come out of that bush. I'm not going to go in. It may have just been a lizard, but because I'm not sure if we're in snake season, because there's the reason that snake was on the path, because it's the first snake I've actually seen in this park. I've seen plenty of like goannas, kangaroos, plenty of kangaroos, but that was the first snake. But it was on the path to actually sunbake itself. It was getting a bit of sun, and it felt me coming, and it's like, God damn it, humans. Slid it off into the bush. It's like I was getting a good tan there. Get my scales all nice and shiny. And then I came along to do a video and I didn't even post. Sorry, snake. But yeah, so yeah, just a way to look at who you are as a person is sometimes in relation to your environment. We've learned from our environment, and sometimes we unlearn demotivating things to get back to who we are. It's like I didn't cut contact from my family because it's like I like the lifestyle choice of being by myself and being orphaned. Basically, I did it for reasons. Similar with the marriage, it's like I left for reasons. So unbreaking that means also unbreaking a lot of my own patterns of behavior and what I became familiar with, which was very not nice stuff and quite toxic stuff. So it's detoxifying the body. Moving away from snake. Oh my god, I tied it in again. This is why I do well in Taoism, because it's a lot of metaphor related stuff, and that's naturally how I talk and think. So it becomes easy. And a lot of the times my Taoist instructor's like going, slow down. It's like, just because you understand it, you still got to put it into practice. So yeah. Anyway, I'll finish the video now. I'm down from Inflation Support Services, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.